So, yes, as I was saying, it's winter here in Canada. It's not all that easy to get outside and prime models. So, what do? Do you wait for better weather? Do you prime inside your home? That's not a good idea. Spray primer, that is. So, what I've been doing is actually, for the last while, is using hand paint primer. Just I apply it by hand. And I actually think that I enjoy the results, and I think it's actually half decent. So let's do it on this guy, not this one. We'll set him aside. And this is what I actually use for hand painting primer. When the weather is bad, or if you just don't want to go outside, especially if it's too hot or too cold or too windy, that can affect your spraying, primering. I use this Liquitex acrylic gesso. And this is actually something that I've had for a very, very long time, more than like 10 years. But it served me well for the purposes of priming. It's actually pretty darn good, actually. So what we're going to do is we're going to find something to pour this into. If I can find a decent cup of some kind. There we go. And so this is actually intended for like painting. Artist with a capital A. Smell your own farts kind of art. And you can just pour some like this. You don't even need a lot because it's a tiny model after all. And yeah, you can get a giant thing of this stuff. It shouldn't be that expensive, or you can get something a whole lot smaller, of course. And the thing about this gesso is that it kind of it's kind of like self-leveling, and it kind of shrinks as it dries. And that's the key, because you can actually apply it kind of sloppily, and it'll still turn out pretty good. And let's just make sure this model isn't dusty. I'm sure it's super old. And you're not really supposed to thin it down with water at all. I do that sometimes, but let's not for the purposes of this. Megatron, doing well, just taking a break from working on a Plague Burst crawler. Cool. Nice. So are you a streamer as well, by the way? I'm just curious if yeah, I always like to ask that, just because if you are, then you know, I'll definitely check out your stream. But anyways, let's apply this on, and look at this. Mad sloppy, right? This is heresy. I'm not thinning my paint, and I'm not really thinking consciously about where it's being applied. But the genius thing about gesso, as I was saying, is that it's kind of like self-leveling, and it shrinks. And so it actually ends up being a lot smoother than you might initially think, even if you slop it on this poorly and haphazardly. And again, I would say that if you want to do a super nice job, you can kind of thin it down just a little bit and do like several layers. And I still probably will do several layers of this. But this is basically how I've been painting my models for a good while, just because it's not convenient for me to go outside, especially in the winter months, to go outside and spray paint. And I remember reading about this a good long while ago, about how you could use gesso to prime your models, and I was like really excited because I had a big bottle of gesso. So I took like a really crappy old orc model and tested it out, and I was like, holy crap, it actually looks half decent. And the other thing you can do is kind of just push it around, push the paint around. And like, you don't want things to cover up completely all the detail, but just push it around. And I've actually been experimenting with this a fair amount, and I found that kind of you can kind of mix other colors too. Like I've been mixing some black ink with this so that like I do like a black primer this way. And I'm trying to get it everywhere, but I'm not getting, you know, I'm not really getting it every single nook and cranny. And yeah, it looks a bit like a disaster right now, but when it dries, it does end up looking pretty nice, I find. And you can always kind of go over it again with a second coat if you feel like it didn't get amazing good coverage. You can kind of go over it again. Let's clean my brush a bit. And the other thing about gesso is that it does not dry immediately. It actually takes a little, not even a little, a lot longer to dry. So you can take your time to kind of push the paint around to get it to everywhere you want. And I would say that at the end of the day, you'd still probably want to spray primer whenever you have the chance. But if you're like me and you're just like, you just don't have the opportunity because of the weather, that's the main thing for me, is like the weather's really crappy these days in Canada. So I'm not really able to go out and spray prime. You can do this. And of course it takes a whole lot more time than spray priming, but again, for me, I'm the type of person that really enjoys doing like basic tasks like this. So I'm kind of fine with it's so mindless that you can do other things like watch YouTube or listen to a podcast. It's kind of chill. So we'll just let this dry. And maybe what I'll do is come back to this model. We'll do another session and film how it looks after I've let it dried or after I've applied a couple more layers, and we'll see how this looks. But yeah, I'm just filming this footage right now for a future video, so we can so there you go. Got a white Necron now. I'm assuming I'm just going to end up painting this guy silver, just whack him with silver and a black wash and then call it a day. But that's generally how I go about doing a hand primer job. I'm trying to look for other models that I have. I actually did this one recently as well. Hand primer, and I did several thinner coats, and I think it actually looks pretty decent for this one. This is an old metal anti-grav platform for the Eldar as well. But what I'll do is, this is another model that I've hand primed, and I think what I'll do is I'll thin down my primer again and do another coat, because it is kind of thin. So let's give me a second and I'll dust this guy off just in case he's got some dust. Always careful about making sure that there's no dust on the model, because you don't want any of that trapped as you're painting. And these are old models, as I've said. So yeah, let's thin this down a bit. So Megatron, have you been playing Warhammer for quite a while then? This is an old KS Cultist model. And Bikazuki, what have you been working on lately? I know you were working on something the last time we chatted. So yeah, when you thin it out, you might get a lot of bubbles. That's not good, but if you kind of just push around the paint, if you kind of push it around and make sure that the bubbles are gone, it shouldn't be too bad. The bubbles will dry up anyways. You can kind of dry your brush and push it around that way. And again, I'm not saying this is like the best method and you should stop spray priming your models, but it's just an alternate way of doing things if you have a lot of time on your hands and if the weather sucks. And we definitely want to make sure that the face doesn't have isn't clogged up with the primer. So we want to make sure and go back there. But I mean, at the end of the day, the priming coat doesn't have to be thick at all. You just need a thin layer for the paint to, your other paint to adhere to. So this is probably good enough, although there are times where I kind of apply a priming layer more thickly. And as I said, and maybe in another video I can show this, I've mixed other paint into the gesso or ink, like blacks and browns, just to have like a gray tone to work from. And that's actually been pretty effective. In fact, I can show some examples because this is done now. And this guy's drying up. Hey, he's looking pretty good actually. All those streaky brush marks, they're kind of gone, which is pretty cool. Can show really quickly some models that I've done using my hands spray primer, like this one here. This is a Lord of the Rings troll. And this is like one of my favorite models I've done recently. That I probably showed it off a handful of times. But yeah, this is all started with a base of hand primer using the same method, but I mixed a little gray to work from because obviously these trolls are gray. And yeah, turned out pretty good. And also the same applies to this model here, for example. Here's another example where I've applied some black and brown inks to darken it up. And now it'll be really easy to paint this model and get some shading done, quick shading, if we kind of build up from this brown and grayish undercoat. And again, here's another example doing the same method. And this model is almost complete. This is Lilith Hersparax, the old original Dark Eldar model. And again, this is a hand primed model. And I think it's looking pretty good. It's almost done. So yeah, that's just another example. Let's take a look at this guy as he's drying. And yeah, not bad. I think I'll do another layer to kind of ensure that I have a nice even coat. But what I'm doing now is just trying to make sure that there's no bubbles are forming. And you can just kind of take a dry brush and kind of make sure. I did this with this Necron model just because I know that I don't really care if I did a bad job. But I think it looks okay, this hand priming technique. And I like it because you can kind of be sloppy with it. And it still turns out actually half decent because, again, the properties of the gesso. And I'll just show that again. This is the product I use, but I'm sure there's a lot of different other options you can use. Liquitex acrylic gesso. I'm not sponsored by these guys, but that's what I'm using. Surface preparation. And yeah, that's just another method you guys can use to prime your guys. There you go. And yeah, I think that might do it for me, everyone.